Primarily the reason why I'm here is to present a terminal diagnosis for the human species. Before I unpack that seemingly absurd statement, I'll just introduce you as to what I do. I'm the host of a podcast. It is a project that I have been working on for several years now, and in the past year or so, I've had the really good fortune to interview and converse with a whole variety of individuals from all over the world. I've spoken with scientists and researchers across various disciplines and various fields of research. I've spoken with journalists and philosophers, political activists, radical political theorists, refugees, as well as some very close friends. Ultimately, what I try to do with this project is I try to tie together seemingly disparate topics, ideas that, at least on the surface, appear to be very different from one another, and weave them together into some kind of coherent and cohesive vision and understanding of the time and the place that we all find ourselves in. A topic that I discuss quite regularly and frequently on this podcast can be called environmental issues. I think that is a rather neutered term. I like to more accurately describe it as the systematic unraveling of our biosphere, or the life systems of our planet. I think it's not quite as benign as environmental issues, but I do think it is much more accurate as a descriptor. As it stands today, our culture is a life-destroying force on this planet. Since 1970, global wildlife populations have declined by over 50%. Insect populations worldwide have seen massive declines these past several decades as well. Our oceans are in dire straits, with the excessive amounts of carbon that have been produced by human industrial activity creating an effect in our oceans where it's becoming more acidic and essentially inhospitable for life to exist. And that doesn't even include all of the billions of tons of plastics and toxic waste that we've been dumping into our oceans. In the global north, the permafrost, which is of course the frozen soil, or I should say once frozen soil, is thawing. As it thaws, it is releasing massive quantities of carbon and methane into our atmosphere, further exacerbating global climate change, which is again a result of human industrial activity these past few centuries. At this point here in this presentation, I would like to play for you a short segment of an interview I had with a journalist named Dar Jamel. This is, of course, with his permission. Dar Jamel is an excellent journalist. He works for the publication Truth Out, where he regularly and very frequently reports on what he calls abrupt climate disruption. In this segment, Dar Jamel answers my question: what are we as a species going to have to adapt to in the coming years as the effects of abrupt climate disruption begin to unfold?
We're going to have to adapt to sea levels that are anywhere from 10 to 30 to 50 feet higher than they are today, depending on, Western Antarctic ice shelf's going to go. The better part of Greenland's going to go. Parts of Eastern Antarctica are already showing signs of coming unplugged. So we're looking at tens of feet of sea level rise that are essentially already baked into the system. We're looking at, I think, atmospheric temperature increases that are already baked into the system of anywhere from a minimum of probably 3 C up to 6, 7, 8 degrees C. Humans have never lived on a planet at 3.5 C above pre-industrial baseline levels. The last time there was the last time this planet was at 3.5 C above pre-industrial baseline levels, oceans were 60 feet higher, and there were snakes the size of yellow school buses on the planet. It gives you an idea, like we are already very much in it. And then that goes into question, how much potable water, how much fresh water will be available for humans? And then, what is that going to mean for arable land and agriculture? Will the planet have the capacity to feed 7.5 billion people? Absolutely not. There's numerous scientists that I've spoken with that think that it's just inevitable that we're going to see a pretty dramatic drop in human populations because there simply won't be enough arable land because of climate disruption to feed the numbers anywhere near the numbers that we have today.
It's become apparent to me, and I think to many people around the world, that if there was a moment, if there was a time that we could have changed course and averted this crisis, that time has passed. That moment is gone. The kind of questions that we need to start asking are not so much how can we stop this from happening, and more of what can we do to potentially adapt to these changes, if that is at all possible. So this is what I want from you. I imagine that what I've said is at least a little triggering. I just presented to you some information that's rather heavy. But this isn't a secret. This isn't some kind of esoteric knowledge that you need a password in order to access. This is being regularly and frequently being reported on and studied. All you need is the curiosity and ultimately the courage to look at this information and see it in the face and take it in for what it really is. And I imagine that as you do begin to take this information in, as I have, and as others are as well, you're going to begin to grieve. And it's a process. It's a multi-stage process. It's not something that's going to come easily. But ultimately, I think that what comes from grief is a gift. There's nothing more clarifying than to be in a state of grief. It puts everything into focus. Personally, considering the state of things, this is ultimately what I want from you. That as you do begin to grieve, you need to ask yourself, what kind of life do you want to live? What kind of projects do you want to pursue? What kind of passions do you want to fulfill? And ultimately, what kind of connections do you want to forge with people? What kind of relationships do you want to have with those that matter to you? I personally want to have the most fulfilling and direct and honest and loving and meaningful and compassionate relationships I can have. Because life is already short anyways, regardless of any of this information. What are you going to do with the time that you have on this planet? And I think that as you do begin to grieve and as this information sits within inside you, we can then do the work that is necessary to potentially adapt to these changes as they unfold. We can build communities and networks that are much more flexible and adaptable and much stronger than the institutions that we currently have today. That is what is required of us. We don't choose to be born in this time and in this place, but here we are, and we have the freedom and the ability to choose to do what we can with what we have available to us. This is what I have for you. Thank you so much for your attention. Godspeed.